Раз, раз, два, три. Раз, два, три, четыре. Раз, раз. Добрый день. Раз, два, три.
Нет, догадаются.
If everybody could please take their seats, we're going to start in just a minute. All right, we'll begin. Good afternoon and welcome to the press conference of international observers for Ukraine's presidential election. I'm Richard Solash. I'm the Director of Communications at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and I will moderate today's press conference. We do have simultaneous translation available, so please do use your headphones for that if needed. I'd also like to ask everyone to silence their mobile phones at this point. Our panel today will offer the preliminary conclusions of this international election observation mission. Copies of the preliminary findings will be available at the conclusion of the press conference outside the hall or, of course, online. Today on our panel we have Mr. João Soares, the Special Coordinator of the OSCE Short-Term Observer Mission. He will be followed by Mr. Ilkka Kanerva, the head of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Delegation of Observers. He will be followed by Mr. Andreas Gross, the head of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe Delegation, followed by Mr. Juran Farm, the head of the European Parliament's Delegation. Then we will have Mr. Karl Lammers, the head of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly Delegation, and finally Ms. Tana de Zulueta, who is the head of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights Election Observation Mission. Our panelists will first make brief statements, and then there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. And with that, we will now begin with Mr. Soares.
Thank you so much, Richard Solas. I hope you all can listen correctly, because here in the table it's not so good, the sound. My first words are to greet the ladies and gentlemen from the Ukrainian and international media who attended this press conference. It's for us an honor and a great pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. To greet, of course, some ambassadors and some diplomats that are here, our colleagues, parliamentarians from the parliamentarian assemblies that are here represented, our Secretary General, and all the people who are here with us. This election proved the democratic spirit of the people of Ukraine, who had the opportunity to express their will at the ballot box and seized it in high numbers. The electoral and security authorities of Ukraine should be commended for their efforts under extraordinary circumstances to facilitate an election that largely upheld democratic commitments. This election was characterized by high voter turnout and the clear resolve of the authorities, which resulted in a genuine election largely in line with international commitments and with respect for fundamental freedoms in the vast majority of the country. This was despite the hostile security environment in two eastern regions of Ukraine and the increasing attempts to derail the process by armed groups in these parts of Ukraine. The election authorities operated impartially and collegially on the whole, although a number of transparency issues arose just prior to the election day. The voting and counting process were transparently and largely in line with procedures despite large queues of voters at polling stations. Clearly, the election took place in a challenging political and security environment, but we must stress that the authorities took genuine efforts to conduct voting throughout the country despite the continued unrest. The election campaign was subdued and overshadowed by the security developments. Most candidates were able to campaign without restrictions except in the two eastern regions. However, there were a number of incidents, such as intimidation and attacks on party and campaign office, as well as cases where candidates were obstructed in their campaign. Electoral preparations in Donetsk and Luhansk were significantly and adversely affected by the security situation there. Intimidation of election officials, including abductions, death threats, and the shooting of a candidate proxy are just some of the illegal attempts to prevent the election and deny citizens the fundamental right to vote. I was pleased to personally visit Odessa in the beginning of May after the tragedy that occurred there in the 2nd of May, and to visit Donetsk city 2 days ago and to meet with authorities there and to express my solidarity with their work. I have great admiration for and applaud the effort of all those officials who tried to continue with their work in spite of the enormous challenges and risks that they faced. The remarkable efforts that authorities and voters went to in these regions is a clear message to the separatist rebels: you cannot win by breaking the rules. This is a very comprehensive statement and very technical. It is generally very positive, a word that is not in the statement but really characterizes what actually happened here. That word is a very simple and clear word: courage. Not just determination, but courage. Courage by the people of Ukraine. Courage by the authorities of Ukraine. Courage by the private citizens, NGOs, and journalists. Their courage saved this country. This was not only an election that took place yesterday, however. Just to the west of us, an important election took place to the European Parliament. In 25 of the 27 countries that belong to the European Union. I'm a member of one of these countries. I'm a member of the Parliament of one of these countries. I've been a member of the European Parliament and I'm very proud of it. But I can guarantee you that many of our colleagues, many politicians across the European Union are envious of the high turnout and passion of the Ukrainian people that came out during the elections yesterday to vote here in Ukraine. Yesterday was critical, but so is tomorrow and the next day. Dialogue between all forces, whatever their position in the country, must continue and must improve. Dialogue is the only solution in a democratic state. This election has provided the stability needed for a clear and forward-looking discussion on Ukraine's future. This statement is our humble contribution also for this democratic future of Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Suarez. We will now continue with Mr. Konerva.
As mentioned, unfortunately, many citizens were prevented from voting in Donetsk and Luhansk, as were nearly all in Crimea, due to the continuing threats to Ukraine's territorial integrity. However, the impressive turnout in the rest of the country offered a powerful rebuke to those who would challenge Ukraine's unity and progress. The OSCE has had a major presence in Ukraine in recent years and particularly in recent months. This election was an important part of the OSCE proposed roadmap that was laid out to support stability in Ukraine. And let's be very, very clear. Yesterday was a vote in favor of stability. We appreciate that the people and the authorities of Ukraine were very open to us, welcoming observers from all OSCE countries. This includes your neighbor Russia, and personally I regret that the Russian Federation didn't send observers with our mission, and it often has done it in the past. Their presence with our team would have been an important addition and contribution to transparency. Parliamentary elections and the constitutional reform process are expected. The process of dialogue and healing must continue, and you can count on our continued support. The OSCE and we in the Parliamentary Assembly remain ready to assist Ukraine to achieve its targets. We believe that parliamentary elections in the near future and the constitutional reform will also prove vital in the process. While I personally was in Kiev yesterday, I understand that people also in the East, where the conditions didn't allow elections, went in search of voting premises. I can only imagine their disappointment that the violence and intimidation that has affected so many of them in recent months now also denied citizens the fundamental right to freely elect their chosen representative. I applaud them and join Mr. Soares in his expressing my administration to those election officials who worked so hard to make this election so successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Farm.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, some comments on behalf of the European Parliament. As part of this election observation mission, the European Parliament fully endorses the preliminary findings and conclusions of the mission. I take this opportunity to thank my colleagues from the other parliamentary assemblies and to commend the excellent work by the ODIHR during this mission. Both EU citizens and Ukrainians went to the polls yesterday. That's a powerful expression of a shared commitment to democracy and to the common goal to live in a free, peaceful and prosperous Europe. As Mr. Soares pointed out, unfortunately, the turnout was lower in most EU member states than in Ukraine, where the high participation shows a clear determination of Ukrainian people to decide their own future. This is a strong expression in favor of democracy, unity and territorial integrity of the country. We expect the international community and all national stakeholders to recognize the will of the people and are happy to note that so far none of the candidates seem to contest the outcome of the elections. We hope this will still be the case in 10 days. We recognize the huge effort of Ukrainian authorities to carry out the elections in line with international standards, despite the short time for preparations, and particularly despite the very tense security situation in parts of the country. We also regret that due to the illegal annexing of Crimea, the vote could not even take place in that region. Most important now is, however, the future, and I believe that this election has laid a solid foundation for the future of Ukraine and the pressing tasks of economic consolidation, political reforms, and uniting the country. I'm confident that the new president is aware of the urgent needs for constitutional reform, genuine dialogue for national unity with all regions and parties concerned, as well as the need for deep and economic and social reforms, and to address fundamental challenges like combating systemic corruption, improving the rule of law, and finalizing judicial reform. The European Union stands ready to support Ukraine, as already shown with our political, financial, and technical assistance in coming new rounds of international talks to find a peaceful solution to the threats to Ukraine's integrity. We also stand ready to sign the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement and finalize visa liberalization talks as soon as all necessary conditions are in place. The incoming European Parliament will definitely remain a very strong supporter of Ukraine and its people in their European future. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Gross.
Thank you. In the name of the 47 member countries and the 50 parliamentarians who are here observing the election, I would like to congratulate the Ukrainian people for this highly extraordinary quality of these elections. By providing such an effort, they gave the best answer to all the aggressions, and the harm who have done to Ukrainian people in the last weeks. And they provided it themselves with the legitimacy, with the political power they need after the revolution. And the extraordinary quality of yesterday's election provides also the new president of Ukraine with the legitimacy he needs to establish immediately an inclusive dialogue with all citizens in the eastern regions, to restore their trust and confidence, and to decentralize state power in order to preserve the unity of the country by respecting the diversity of the society. We are convinced that the president knows this. That's why he was elected. And he showed it also by his announcements to pay his first visit to the eastern parts of the country. But we also know that he can only start to work in 10 days. And I would like to state here that all those who are responsible in different positions until the new president starts his work will do nothing which undermines the new president's efforts. Because the new president knows that there is no military solution to today's crisis. And that's why nothing should happen to undermine this will and this insight. And those who belong together can only come together through dialogue, mutual understanding, the social reforms, and greater fairness this country needs, the people of this country needs, to stay together by respecting the diversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Lammers.
Шановні пані та панове, вітаю вас. Мені дуже приємно представляти тут парламентську асамблею НАТО у цій місії спостерігачів. Цей час дуже важливий для вашої країни, і ми раді, що змогли взяти участь в цьому процесі. Before Sunday, everyone agreed that this election was going to be a very important one. Everyone also agreed that this was going to be a difficult election. But much fewer were those who believed that was going to be a successful election. In fact, some believed the election would not take place at all, or that the process would be derailed. Well, I am glad to say that the Ukrainian authorities and the Ukrainian people have made this election a success, a great success. Respect. Since February, Ukrainian authorities have deployed remarkable efforts to allow this election to take place. And they did this in an exceptionally challenging environment. Despite these challenges, we have actually seen improvements in the election process in several key areas. I would like to join my colleagues in paying tribute to all election officials across the country who have worked hard in sometimes extremely difficult conditions to make the conduct of the election possible. I have heard, and I think my colleague Julio Miranda Calha from Portugal will agree, we have heard and seen many stories yesterday of common people determined to perform their duties with dedication and professionalism, sometimes despite intimidation, threats of violence, and even physical attacks. And last, but certainly not least, I would like to pay tribute to the Ukrainian people who, by voting in large numbers, have demonstrated once again that they want to be the masters of their own destiny, that they want to determine their country's future path by themselves, and that they want a united Ukraine. And that is a great message. Unfortunately, not all Ukrainians were able to vote. Despite the authorities' efforts to provide alternative solutions, Ukrainian citizens in Crimea and in parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions were deprived of their constitutional right to vote. Our countries and organizations have condemned this unacceptable situation and will continue to do so until the legitimate democratic order is restored to these regions. The newly elected president of Ukraine will have the difficult, but I think all-important task to speak on behalf of all Ukrainians, including the people of Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk, who were not able to vote. He will have to unite all Ukrainians, regardless of ethnicity or language, behind a common agenda for the country. In this regard, I welcome Mr. Poroshenko's commitment to make his first official visit as president to the Donbass. So, this election was largely in line with international standards. Maybe there were a few problems before mentioned in our report. I am convinced these will all be solved. Today, our assessment is very clear. These elections are a significant step forward to a united Ukraine, a success all Ukrainians should be proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. de Zulueta.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank, on behalf of the OSCE-ODIHR Election Observation Mission, those who made our mission here possible. I would like to thank the authorities for inviting us, the Central Election Commission for all the assistance and cooperation provided, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs for facilitating our work, and all other authorities for their assistance and cooperation. Without their help, we would not have been able to complete our observation mission. I would also like to thank the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, the OSCE Project Coordinator in Ukraine, for the good work that we have been able to do side by side for the OSCE. This was a special mission for what we have all repeated was indeed an important election. On election day, OSCE ODIHR deployed 1,200 observers from 49 countries, including 1,025 long-term and short-term deployed by our own mission. We were joined, as you know, by the important parliamentary delegations whose heads have spoken before me. We have been in the country, OSCE ODIHR election observation, and been in the country for over 2 months, and we were therefore able to observe all the stages of the preparations for this important election. We were able to deploy 100 long-term observers to all regions except Crimea, the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and Sevastopol. We had long-term observers in Luhansk and Donetsk as well, right to the end, including on polling day. We will stay until the end of the process, until tabulation of results is completed and complaints and appeals have been dealt with. We expect to depart, therefore, on the 7th of June. As I mentioned before, overall, what you've had today appears to have been a positive assessment. This is borne out by what we were able to observe. According to our observation, in 98% of polling stations observed, voting was assessed as positively. There was this slightly less high, this positive vote, for those polling stations where they were also holding municipal elections, usually due to problems of overcrowding and similar organizational issues. In a positive development in this election, this observation mission received no reports of misuse of administrative resources. We have commended the Central Election Commission in our report for it working in an independent, impartial, and collegial manner, and efficiently. And we have also pointed out that they were able to meet all their deadlines. However, the election administration faced numerous difficulties, largely as a result either of a cumbersome or inadequate regulation. There is room for improvement. We will be looking at, and we have been discussing it with our Ukrainian counterparts, but ODIHR is ready to continue assisting the election authorities and the local authorities in reforms which could bring the process up to scratch. We have been reporting on numerous changes to the legal framework in which this election was held. Most of these changes were seen as necessary by all participants. Some were specially taken to face an emergency situation in the East. But once again, election reform can be completed. It was initiated before this election. It can be completed in good time. For this, ODIHR would be happy, I repeat, on behalf of the organization, to continue its collaboration. On one issue, previous recommendations had mentioned the need to improve campaign finance regulation. There was no time, apparently, to address this issue before this election. There was, however, a good precedent set by a hereto limited voluntary exercise in disclosure of assets by some candidates. Once again, this is an area in which dialogue and assistance would always be forthcoming. It's worth noting that the voter list, which in some years past had been an issue, was not considered a problem by any of the stakeholders. There is confidence in the manner in which this important instrument of democracy is being maintained. On the question of voting in Luhansk and Donetsk, to which the media has devoted much attention, As I mentioned before, we had long-term observers in both regions throughout our observation period. And they have been witnessing mounting difficulties for the election administration and the local population, including direct intimidation, often by armed individuals. These intimidations were intended to deny the citizens the fundamental right to freely participate in this election. There were some shocking pictures on international media of masked individuals yesterday smashing ballot boxes. There is something particularly cowardly about wearing a mask if you are involved in that kind of activity. We move on, thanks to this election. On the question of the media, I would like to point you to the fact that we were able to monitor the national broadcasting media since the 1st of April with qualitative and quantitative a report that you will be able to access in full in our final report, but which we already draw attention to our preliminary results in our current statement. There has been a positive development in the media front, which was the fact that debates were held on national television, and also, as recommended by OSCE ODIHR, the state television has been, or by law, and will soon be in practice, converted into a public service broadcaster. So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to you all. And before closing these remarks, I'd like to point out one fact regarding gender. Everybody has congratulated the election administration, and especially polling staff who are operating in often difficult situation, cramped, sometimes with scarcity of resources, in order to be able to enable the citizens who in such large numbers were trying to vote. Well, 71% of the polling staff were women, so thanks to the women of Ukraine, it went well.
If you are one word to add to what has been said by my dear friend and colleague Ilka Kanever regarding Russian observers. We in the OSCE EPA invited our colleagues from both chambers of Russian parliament, the Duma and the upper chamber, to come with us as observers. And we said to our Ukrainian colleagues and the Ukrainian authorities that for us it was a point of honor. Our Russian colleagues didn't want to come. We respected their position. But I wanted to underline that yesterday our team that was in Odessa and my good friend and colleague Roberto Montella met two Russian members of the Duma, opposition members of the Duma of Parliament that were there, and I wanted to underline that as a very positive fact. So there were at least two Russian observers in the Ukrainian elections. And there is another point that we discussed this morning, not with the Council of Europe, but I would also like to remind here that Saturday afternoon, an Italian journalist, Andrea Rocchelli, was killed near Sloviansk, apparently by members of the Ukrainian National Guard, together with his driver and a Russian friend and interpreter. Andreas was a brave reporter who had worked in several war theaters, including Libya, Chechnya, and Afghanistan. It's not yet clear what happened on the reason for the casualties, but this is yet another demonstration of the tragedy of what has been going on in recent months here in Ukraine. And what we expect will finish with this election that we have been observing. I wanted to pray in the name of the OSCE PA and probably in the name of all other PAs, our respect to the memory, to their memory here and today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. We will now have an opportunity for some questions. We do have a microphone. Please wait for the microphone. Several microphones, actually. Before asking your question, please state your name and your media affiliation.
Jamie Detmer, Daily Beast and Voice of America. Two questions. One, did the election observer and leadership have any chance to sit down and have talks with separatist leaders? And the second question is, were there any security incidents involving OSCE observers yesterday?
Perhaps that's a question for Ms. de Zulueta.
No, we did not have any contact with the separatists or the promoters of other initiatives in the East. They were not involved in the election. They were not stakeholders. And as to our involvement in any security incidents, no, we had none. Thank you.
Thank you.
I may add that...
Let me add...
Just...
We said several times publicly that we were ready to have contacts with everybody. And that has been always our position everywhere in the world. And we don't know also of incidents. It was a small incident when we visited Donetsk on Saturday morning, but it doesn't count.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please raise your hand here, please.
My name is Vladimir Vashchenko, Russian Itartas news agency. You've said that you have mentioned no law breakings which seriously damaged the elections, the process of preparation to the elections. But how you explain the situation with Oleg Tsarev, which was several times beaten during his election campaign and finally refused to take part in these elections? Thank you.
I think the question is for me. In our statement, it's clear that we condemn this kind of things that happened. And we referred expressly some cases where candidates were threatened and were surrounded by people in certain places of Ukraine. We condemn absolutely. We are absolutely in favor of the absolute freedom of movement for every candidate. But there is also to distinguish between what is propaganda and what is the reality of fact. That's why we underline so much the fact that we went, despite OSCE security didn't want us to go, to Odessa 2 days after the 2nd of May, to see the situation in the place. And people there in Odessa from our team of security of the OSCE, and we are very proud of Odir and OSCE people that were, didn't wanted us to go to the building of the unions in the middle of the park. But I went there to look with my eyes and to speak directly with people who were there. And it's very important that. And we know what happened. It's not what had been told to us, sometimes also here in Kiev, and sometimes what we read in certain international media. That's why we tried to be, and we have reached this objective to be in Donetsk Saturday during the day.
Thank you. Any more questions, please? Miss.
Yes, hello. My name is Petra Bornift. I'm from the European Platform for Democratic Elections. And please, I don't want to break the regulations. Just one sentence. There were not only 2 observers from Russia. We mentioned to bring in 200 observers from Russia, from the civil society, and just as a sign for solidarity, there will be some more information tomorrow, 11, at the International Media Center.
Thank you very much. Let's just please have journalists from here on in ask questions, but thank you. Any more questions? Please, sir. Just, yes. Okay.
Does it work? Yeah. Thank you. Mark Bojanik from the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. It's a UN mission. Could you please tell us how many polling stations were open in Lugansk and Donetsk, were operational, and what was the turnout in those 2 regions? Thank you.
Sorry, before we answer that question, maybe let's just make sure we have time for the journalists' questions. I believe there was a lady behind the cameras. Please.
Radio
We will.
Svoboda, Ukrainian
I think,
service of
I think
radio.
Tana can answer this question. It's very difficult.
I have this number. I've been asked by another UN official. As you know, polling did not take place in 10 out of the 12 election districts of Luhansk Oblast and 14 of the 22 election districts of Donetsk Oblast. Altogether, the Central Election Commission reports that just over 800 of the 3,908 polling stations in those regions were able to open, at least for a bit. We can report, as far as those that we are able to observe, in both regions, that turnout was below average due to the insecure environment, way below that.
We had the question from the correspondent from Radio Svoboda, please.
Ukrainian service of RFRL. My question would be about, again, the East. Do you think that residents of Donetsk and Luhansk regions should consider this president legitimate if the majority of them were not able to participate in the elections due to various reasons? And the second question, can you comment local elections that took place yesterday in key Ukrainian regions, and especially in Odessa, when one of the mayoral candidates, Eduard Gurvits, is talking about gross violations during the elections?
Which one of our panelists would like to? Mr. Suarez, if you'd like to.
We are not going to comment the local elections, of course, because if we commented Odessa, we should comment also Kiev. We know that in certain places of Ukraine there were also local elections, but we came to observe the presidential elections in Ukraine, and that's what we are commenting. And of course, I think that everybody in Ukraine should consider this president as a legitimate president that was elected by a very high turnout, even compared with the leadership and the Parliament of the European Union. As I said in my first statement, we would be very proud in the European Union if we had a turnout so high as the. And there is also another point. We should never, in a democratic process, give arguments, and less even give victory to those who are against the democratic rules. And those who threaten the people of Donetsk and Lugansk were threatening the democratic rules and were against the democratic rules there. I think that that is clear in this election process. That's what we felt the day before yesterday when we were in Donetsk. Several of us, Ilka Kanerva, our Secretary General, George Tsereteli, a Canadian parliamentarian, and myself, that's what we felt in Donetsk clearly. People were afraid. That proves that these people are against democracy, and that proves also that their so-called referendum 2 weeks ago was a fraud. Because if they were so convinced that the majority of the people there was in favor of their separatist and non-friendly positions, they would allow people to vote. But they didn't allow the people to vote. They didn't allow polling stations, many polling stations, to open. Yesterday, none of the polling stations that was prepared to open in the city of Donetsk opened. There were several others, and Tana Zulueta underlined the number of people that vote and the polling stations that were. Of course, people consider legitimate. I think they should consider absolutely legitimate the president that resulted from such clear elections.
Could I just add to this that if we didn't consider these elections legitimate because of the threats in the East, it would mean that a violent minority everywhere in the world could stop democratic elections. So we definitely, in this situation, has no other choice than to consider these elections legitimate, particularly regarding the high turnout in the country overall.
Thank you. Any further questions? Please raise your hand. Sir, in the front.
Hello, excuse me, my name is Andrew Redman, I'm from EU Observer in Brussels. ODIHR election reports normally are nuanced, they're rarely black and white, thumbs up, thumbs down. In this case, there are plenty of parties who may wish to claim that these elections were flawed to some extent, that the new president lacks legitimacy. Are you, Ms. Zulueta, prepared to say that these elections were definitely legitimate, that this was a white result?
Luckily, we're not in the business of legitimating elections. We report on the process and on their compatibility, on their adherence to OSCE commitments, national law and international standards. Overall, we were able to report that this election did indeed meet those standards. If you look even at the brief conclusions at the beginning of our preliminary statements, you will notice that, of course, there are still problems, and we try and look at those constructively.
Thank you. Any further questions? Please raise your hand. I'll take a couple more if there are. No?
If you allow, I said about the question put by. We are not here as Ukrainian politicians or as Ukrainian citizens. We are here as international observers with our experience. And I had the honor of being here in the last presidential elections and before, several times before. I was here before the first turn. I was here during the first turn, between the first and the second turn, and in the second turn. And I think one of the problems that Ukraine suffers as far as politics are concerned is a lack of stability, of political stability. We have to, together, to build a democracy where political stability can be reached and can be respected, whatever we like or not, those who are in power. And that's a very important thing. The choice of making presidential elections was made by the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, not by us. If you ask me personally what I would like, I would probably prefer to have legislative elections and after presidential elections. But that's another story. That's not our point. We are not here to express our personal points of view. We are here to give our contribution as observers to the elections that the legitimate parliament of Ukraine asked us. That's the point.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else any of our panelists would like to say? If not, we'll conclude. Before you leave, let me ask you to please exit to your right. That is through the doors that you came in. Paper copies of the statement are available here and online. Thank you very much for coming.